I like the John passage read just now for us by Stephanie because it speaks to the tribulation of the world, but with a quick follow-up from Jesus saying, "But take courage, I have overcome the world." But prior to that, he tells his disciples that he, Jesus, is not alone because the Father is with me. Last Sunday, the first part of a three-part series, The Goodness That Exists, we talked about the transcendent beliefs that emanate from our Creator: liberty, equality, and justice. Beliefs that have the power to overcome the evil of terror that concerns and greatly saddens and worries us all, especially as we recount the increasingly long list of terror-related events that have taken the lives, as we know, of innocent people and have devastated the lives of hundreds of families, including the most recent in Manchester and London and Western Egypt. Not only has terror caused heartbreak and anguish in the lives of too many in too many countries, it has disrupted travelers' plans at airports. Now serious talk, of course, about banning laptops on international flights into the United States. Security even walking into football stadiums and basketball coliseums, the clear bag policy as one example. It has created uncertainty and tentativeness in travel abroad, has even canceled people's plans because of the insecurity of the unknown. And for many, there is a subconscious restlessness about being a victim of terrorism, him or herself. But allow me to go back again to the foundational principles of our nation, which have overcome evil and will continue to do so. Going back to the Judeo-Christian tradition, the bedrock of our nation, whose scriptures urge us to never lose hope and to always look forward with faith and optimism. Paul states it clearly in the 12th chapter of the book of Romans: "Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good." One of the beautiful things about our American society is that our nation, of course, doesn't act out of the spirit of revenge. We act out of defense of the goodness that we know will win out in the end. We defend and stand for principles that have stood for 240 plus years and will continue ad infinitum as long as we preserve those same ideals so special to our nation. Hold fast to which is good, Paul says in 2 Thessalonians. And here in a nutshell is what we hold on to, the belief, as Thomas Jefferson wrote in the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And to those who don't believe in freedom, this clause in the Declaration is an obvious threat. As Wall Street Journal writer Victor Hanson wrote recently, democracies and republics will always be the natural targets of aggressors who sense freedom as a weakness to be exploited rather than magnanimity to be appreciated. And some say this is one of the roots of terrorism: the inability to operate within a system that promises freedom and opportunity, and the personal anger and failure many terrorists feel due to their own personal problems. David Brooks wrote, "For the terrorist, a sense of humiliation is the primary reality. Terrorism emerges from a psychic state, not a spiritual one. This turns into a grievance, the belief that some external enemy is the cause of my injury, rather than some internal weakness." He continues, "For the religious person, it's about God. For the terrorist, it's about himself." When Omar Mateen, the Orlando nightclub shooter, was in the midst of his rampage, he was posting on Facebook, calling a TV station, His audience was us, not the divine. Omar Martin wanted to think he was martyring himself, said Brooks, in the name of holiness. He was actually obliterating himself for the sake of revenge. So we see how shallow and selfish terrorism is. Similar to when a person joins an urban street gang, thinking that he will find personal fulfillment and identification through violence and criminal behavior. All he really has done is set himself on a path to destruction because of some grievance he holds, perhaps against his family or someone else in authority, and more than likely, he just doesn't like himself. The motive for joining is usually revenge. And in this shallowness, we understand that we will not be overcome by this manifestation of evil, but that good will prevail. And there's plenty of good in the world. Several weeks ago, when I was driving home from work under a pretty dark and threatening sky, I noticed one of our members who pulled up behind a young woman who had just had a flat tire on the northbound lanes of Manhattan Avenue near the intersection of Kimball Avenue. I pulled up behind him as he was jacking up the right front end of the car, and after he had loosened all the lug nuts, and I lent a hand as we were trying to get it done before any thunderstorm unleashed its wrath. We got the tire on, and the young woman was very grateful, and Joel Anderson and I continued our respective drives home. What is the point of this story? Simply to illustrate that one of the many stories like this goes on in America every single day. A person, Joel, stops to help someone he doesn't even know because it is the right thing to do. And he follows the biblical injunction, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Not unlike the parable of the Good Samaritan, which is foundational in the American ethic and experience. Two people pass the badly wounded man in the ditch and do nothing. But the Samaritan, the unlikeliest of the three to help, attends to the man's wounds and makes sure that he's taken care of. The goodness that exists. We know the goodness of this country is manifested in countless ways, which is one of the many reasons that goodness will prevail. Consider a young man by the name of Ahmed, whose family fled Somalia during that nation's bloody civil war. Their home had been repeatedly targeted by robbers, the last time by a group of men wearing black ski masks and armed with AK-47s. Ahmad was actually born in a Kenyan refugee camp. After his birth, his family was granted political asylum by the United States. Said Ahmad's mother, "It was the greatest gift. It was the greatest gift. We could live in a country that prided itself on liberty and freedom." And so said Ahmad himself, it was this beacon of hope. Here you could come, and if you worked really hard, you could pursue any idea you had. Ahmad would go on to Cornell University, graduate. Ahmad was awarded a Rhodes Scholarship to study at Oxford for 2 years. His mother said, "This country has been amazing for us," which was followed up by another comment. After learning that her son had been honored with a Rhodes Scholarship, she said, "What, you're leaving the country?" And then Ahmed would say, "I feel like my story would be possible only in a few other countries, if any." The goodness that exists. Similar to the spirit of the African-American singer, Roberta Flack, who grew up in Black Mountain, North Carolina. You know, some of you remember those songs, you know, First Time I Ever Saw Your Face and Killing Me Softly with a Song, and whose mother had only gone as far as the 10th grade and whose father had only completed the 3rd grade. But Roberta Flack said about her parents, "My parents were both very literate. They spoke well, and their values were very high. They drummed into our heads that the situation that you live in doesn't have to live in you. This is the spirit of our country. This is a spirit that will always, always overcome evil. You know, I mentioned a few weeks ago a biography I was reading on the Wright brothers by David McCullough. Orville and Wilbur Wright, of course, the inventors of the first airplane that actually flew. I wrote down a statement by the author that doesn't exactly talk about the goodness in this country, but the idea behind the strength of our nation. The idea being the freedom to create and the freedom to hope. McCullough wrote about the Wright brothers on the eastern edge of the United States attempting to fly their plane at Kitty Hawk on the Outer Banks. He wrote, "The end of the world had fast become the center of the world because it was the touchable embodiment of an idea which presently is to make the world something different than it has ever been before." And that is what the American experiment has done for the rest of the world. It made something different than it has ever been before. And this is why the goodness of our country will overcome the evil of the world. And this goodness was clearly evidenced after 9/11 attack, as we know, at the World Trade Center. Well, both centers, you remember those horrible sites, were teetering at the tops, preparing to collapse. And thousands of people were running down the stairs to escape the horrific disaster. At the same time, many New York firefighters were running up the stairs in the middle of this awful danger to save others. I know one of our members, Micah Heidemann, a firefighter himself, has done the memorial stair climb at Town Center in downtown Kansas City, where firefighters have climbed 110 flights of stairs in full gear, each wearing a picture of one of the firefighters who died to commemorate their sacrifice. "Greater love hath no man than this," said Jesus, "than to lay down his life for his friends." The goodness that exists. You know, there is no denying the collective religious conscience of Americans, which calls for an affirmation of the dignity of life. God continues to call us to protect that dignity. We as Americans have a special destiny, and that destiny directs us to defend freedom, which we will always do, no matter the level of the evil. Consider these two quotes from two of our presidents. At the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis in October of 1962, President Kennedy said, "The cost of freedom is always high, and Americans have always paid it. Our goal is not the victory of might, but the vindication of right. Not peace at the expense of freedom, but both peace and freedom here in this hemisphere, and we hope around the world. God willing, the goal will be achieved." And President George W. Bush at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C., right after 9/11, "The world God created is of moral design. Grief, tragedy, and hatred are only here for a time. Goodness, remembrance, and love have no end." Now, although we recently showed this film clip from the movie World Trade Center on the 50th anniversary of 9/11 last September, I think it's worth seeing again. Its theme is very relevant to what we have talked about today, the goodness that exists.